Draco Malfoy never expected the stories to be true. The whispers about the Chamber of Secrets, the legend of the Basilisk, the promise that Salazar Slytherin had left behind a weapon for his heir. All of it had seemed like just another ghost tale passed down through the halls of Hogwarts, something to terrify mudbloods and remind them of their place. But standing here, alone in the abandoned bathroom, staring down at the serpent-engraved sink, he couldn't ignore the feeling twisting in his chest. His father had always spoken of bloodlines, legacy, strength, but he had never actually done anything. What if Draco could be the one to prove their superiority? To show the world that Slytherins were more than just the cunning ones, that they were meant to rule. His pulse pounded as his fingers traced the stone, cool and ancient beneath his touch. He had spent months searching for something, anything, that could lead him to this place. The rumours had been right. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, the pipes, the way the castle itself seemed to shudder with some kind of old, restless magic. But now that he was here, now that he had found it, the next step made his throat dry. How did Tom Riddle do it? He had spoken in Parseltongue, the language of snakes, the language of Salazar Slytherin himself. Draco swallowed hard. He didn't know Parseltongue. At least, he didn't think he did. His mind raced. He had heard it before. When Potter had spoken it in second year, when the dueling club turned into a disaster, the sound of it had stuck with him, slithering through his memory like a living thing. He hadn't understood it then. But what if he could? The thought burned through him. His father had never spoken of any connection to Slytherin beyond their pure blood heritage. But Draco had always felt different. The whispers in the halls, the way the shadows in the dungeons sometimes seemed to stretch toward him. Little things he had ignored, dismissed as nonsense. But now, here, standing in front of the place where it all began, something inside him told him to try. His lips parted. A sound escaped, strange, hissing, unnatural. The serpent engraving shimmered. The sink twisted open. Draco took a step back, his heart slamming against his ribs. He had done it. The passage yawned before him, dark and waiting. There was no turning back now. He climbed in, lowering himself into the tunnel. The stone was damp beneath his hands, slick with years of condensation. The descent was faster than he expected, the path sloping downward until he landed with a rough thud on the cold floor of an underground corridor. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something older, something that smelled like the deep parts of the forbidden forest. His wand flickered in his hand as he moved forward, each step echoing through the silence. The walls were lined with carvings, stories in stone depicting a time long forgotten. Serpents coiled around wizards in flowing robes, their eyes hollow and watchful. And then, at the very end of the corridor, a massive door loomed before him. Salazar Slytherin's mark was etched into the center. Draco swallowed hard. He could feel something behind it. A presence. A waiting. He licked his lips and spoke again, this time with more confidence. Open. The door groaned, dust falling from its edges as it creaked forward. The torches along the chamber walls flared to life, casting eerie light over the vast underground space. And there, standing tall in the center of it all, was the statue of Salazar Slytherin. Draco's breath hitched. He had read about it, heard the stories, but to see it in person, to stand where Tom Riddle had stood, where Salazar Slytherin's true heir was meant to claim his birthright, was something else entirely. But before he could process it, a voice filled the chamber. It was everywhere and nowhere. A whisper and a roar. You are not the first to seek my power. Draco's blood turned to ice. He spun around, but there was no one there. Just shadows, flickering against the damp stone. Who's there? His voice came out steadier than he expected, though his hands clenched tighter around his wand. Tom Riddle was clever, the voice mused. Ambitious, but he was not my heir. Draco frowned, his heart hammering against his ribs. What do you mean? Riddle was Slytherin's heir. He opened the chamber. He controlled the Basilisk. He was a thief, the voice said simply. A parasite, desperate to steal what was never his. Draco's breath came faster now, his mind scrambling to make sense of what he was hearing. And you, the voice continued, you are different. Something shifted beneath his feet. The air itself seemed to press against him, like the chamber was watching. Draco shook his head. That's impossible. My father would have told me. Your father does not know. The words cut through him like ice water. Lucius Malfoy was a man of many secrets. He was cold, manipulative, powerful. But Draco had never once considered that there might be something he didn't know. Something about him. His stomach twisted. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be. But the magic in the chamber, the way the walls seemed to pulse with some kind of living energy, told him otherwise. Draco had done something no one else had. He had awakened the chamber in a way Riddle never could. He was Salazar Slytherin's heir. The realization hit him like a crashing wave, leaving him breathless. He wanted to deny it, to argue, to call the voice a liar, but deep down something inside him knew. And then, from the depths of the chamber, a hiss echoed. Low, ancient. The sound of something waking up. Draco froze. The basilisk. He had really done it now. His grip on his wand tightened as the great serpent slithered forward, its massive body shifting in the shadows. Even with his eyes lowered, he could feel the weight of its presence, the sheer power radiating from the creature. The basilisk was waiting. Draco's breath came in shallow gasps. His instincts screamed at him to run, to leave this place and never look back. But something else, something deep in his bones, told him to stay, to face it, to claim what was his. He licked his lips, and before he could stop himself, the words left his mouth in a hissed whisper. "You are free." The basilisk stilled. Draco could hardly believe what he had just said. But even more shocking was what happened next. The massive serpent bowed its head, waiting. Draco Malfoy had just done something no wizard had ever done before, and nothing would ever be the same again. Draco's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. The basilisk, Salazar Slytherin's legendary monster, bowed its head before him. It was impossible. It had served Tom Riddle, yes, but only as a tool, a weapon commanded by the false heir. But this was different. This wasn't submission. This was recognition. He felt it deep inside, like something ancient had awakened in his blood. His father's words about lineage, about legacy, came rushing back, but they were wrong. Lucius Malfoy had no idea who his son truly was. Draco wasn't just another pure-blood wizard. He was something more. The air between him and the basilisk was thick with tension. It waited. He could feel its intelligence pressing against him, assessing him, deciding if he was worthy. He swallowed, struggling to steady his breath. "You understand me," he whispered in Parseltongue, the language coming so naturally now that it felt as if he had spoken it his entire life. The basilisk let out a slow, rumbling hiss. "I have always understood you." Draco nearly stumbled backward. He had expected it to respond, yes, but not like that. Not with something so personal. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay grounded. "What do you mean?" The serpent coiled, its massive body shifting through the chamber with an eerie, fluid grace. "You carry his blood, the blood of the true heir, the one who was meant to open the chamber, long before the thief came." Draco's fingers tightened around his wand. I don't understand. Your family has no idea what you are." The word sent a shiver down his spine. He wanted to deny it, wanted to argue, but something in the chamber hummed in agreement. The very walls of this ancient place whispering secrets that had been buried for centuries. A terrible thought crept into his mind. If what the basilisk said was true, if he really was Salazar Slytherin's heir, then Tom Riddle wasn't. Everything he thought he knew about the Chamber of Secrets, about Slytherin's legacy, about Voldemort himself, it was all wrong. His father had worshipped the Dark Lord, had followed him blindly, believing he was the ultimate heir to Slytherin's will. But if Riddle had only stolen that power, then what did that make Lucius Malfoy? A fool, a pawn. And Draco had been raised to be just like him. His hands shook, his entire body cold, despite the thick heat of the chamber. His whole life had been built on a lie. His father had preached the importance of bloodlines, yet he had followed a half-blood pretender and never even realized it. Draco felt sick. His eyes flickered toward the basilisk's massive form, its golden slit pupil eyes still lowered, careful not to meet his directly. It wasn't trying to kill him. It wasn't even treating him like a master. It was treating him like an equal. A realization hit him so forcefully it almost stole his breath. Tom Riddle had commanded the basilisk, but Draco had freed it. He wasn't meant to be a ruler over this creature. He was meant to be something else, something more, something Slytherin himself had intended. The air in the chamber shifted. The torches along the walls flickered. And then the voice returned. Not the basilisk's, not Draco's own thoughts, but his, the voice of Salazar Slytherin. "You have done what no other has done. You have not claimed power. You have earned it." Draco's breath hitched. I don't want it." Silence. Then the voice responded, amused. "Liar." Draco grit his teeth, shaking his head. I never wanted, I just wanted." He stopped himself. What did he want? For years he had chased after his father's approval, had tried to live up to the Malfoy name. But that wasn't what this was about. Not anymore. This was bigger than his father, bigger than the Malfoys, bigger than Voldemort. He lifted his gaze toward the basilisk once more. It had been waiting here for centuries, bound to a lie, used as a tool for fear and control. But it wasn't meant to be a weapon. It was meant to protect something. Draco's throat tightened. "You've been trapped here all this time," he whispered, forced to obey whoever found the chamber. The basilisk remained still. "I have only ever followed those who spoke the old tongue. Until now." Draco exhaled slowly. He could end it. Right now. He could kill the basilisk, destroy the chamber, wipe Slytherin's so-called weapon from history forever. He could make sure that no one, no future Voldemort, no Death Eater, ever used it again. But as he looked at the creature before him, he knew that wasn't the right choice. This wasn't a weapon to be destroyed. It was a power to be understood. Draco lowered his wand. "No more," he said, his voice steady. "You're free." The basilisk uncoiled, shifting its massive head toward him. For a moment, Draco thought it would strike, that it would finally lash out after centuries of being bound to the chamber. But instead it bowed again. A rush of energy surged through Draco's veins. It was like the chamber itself had recognized his words, had accepted them. Something burned against the inside of his palm. He glanced down and froze. A mark had appeared on his skin, faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The emblem of Salazar Slytherin. His stomach twisted. This wasn't just some ordinary scar. This was a symbol, a legacy he couldn't outrun. And for the first time in his life, Draco Malfoy wasn't afraid of what that meant. He straightened his shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever truth he had uncovered tonight, it wasn't something he could ignore. He was Salazar Slytherin's heir, and the world was going to find out. Draco stood in the depths of the chamber, his breathing slow and measured. The emblem on his palm still tingled, as if the very magic of the place had etched itself into his skin. The basilisk remained before him, its massive coils shifting slightly, waiting. It no longer looked like a mindless beast, no longer just a monster hidden beneath Hogwarts. It was something else. A guardian, a relic, a secret that had been twisted into a weapon by those who never truly understood it. And now it was free. Draco exhaled, trying to steady himself, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down on him. His entire life had been a lie. His father had followed Voldemort, worshipped him, believing him to be the rightful heir to Slytherin's power. But that power had never belonged to him. It had belonged to Draco. His head spun with the implications. What would his father say? Lucius Malfoy had built his entire existence around serving Voldemort, upholding the purity of their bloodline. He had sacrificed everything for that cause, his wealth, his influence, even his dignity, in the end. And yet, the truth had been right under his nose the entire time. Draco was no follower, no servant. He was something Lucius could never be, and now he had a choice to make. The basilisk watched him closely. It could sense it. The shift in his thoughts, the war raging in his mind. It had spent centuries trapped here, bound by commands it had no choice but to obey. But now, for the first time, it was looking at someone who could choose. Draco swallowed. He had spent years listening to his father, following orders, doing what was expected of him. He had let himself believe that was all he was meant for. To uphold the Malfoy name, to do his part for the family. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. His fingers curled into a fist. He would not be his father. He would not be Voldemort. He would be something else entirely. His wand was still warm in his grip, and for a brief moment he thought about what would happen if he destroyed the chamber, sealed it for good. He could end the legend here and now, erase the darkness that had haunted Hogwarts for centuries. But that wouldn't change the truth. The world would always look for power, and someone else would come searching for it one day. Someone worse than Riddle. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to use the chamber for destruction. If Draco erased it, he wouldn't be preventing another Voldemort. He would just be delaying the inevitable. No, this was his burden now. His responsibility. He turned his gaze back to the basilisk, his voice steady when he spoke. "No more hiding." The great serpent lifted its head slightly, its golden eyes gleaming. Draco took a deep breath. "You belong to this castle. You were never meant to be a weapon. If you want to stay here, you can. But no one will use you again." A long silence stretched between them. Then, in the slow, deliberate movements of an ancient creature that had seen more lifetimes than he could comprehend, the basilisk inclined its head. Acceptance. Draco's pulse steadied. It was done. The Chamber of Secrets had been opened one last time, and its heir had finally claimed it not with control, but with understanding. A strange calm settled over him. He had come down here expecting to find a monster. Instead, he had found himself. The air around him seemed to shift, as if the very walls of the chamber recognized the change. He could feel it in his bones. He had rewritten something old, something buried in the history of this place. And now it was time to return to the world above. He turned, stepping toward the passage that had brought him here. The basilisk remained still, watching him go, as if it knew that this moment meant something more than either of them could fully grasp. Draco didn't look back. He didn't need to. By the time he reached the surface again, the castle was silent. It was late, long past curfew. The stone sink slid back into place behind him, hiding the passage once more. His legs felt heavy as he stepped into the dimly lit corridor. He had come down here as one person. He was leaving as someone else entirely. A figure moved in the shadows ahead. Draco tensed, gripping his wand. Dumbledore. The old man stood there, robes flowing, his blue eyes twinkling in that infuriating way that always made Draco feel like he was being watched through a looking glass. He should have known. The headmaster had always known too much. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Then, with quiet amusement, he spoke. "You have done something no wizard has done in centuries." Draco clenched his jaw. "I don't know what you're talking about." A small smile flickered across the headmaster's lips. "Ah, well then. If you ever do remember, I trust you will use that knowledge wisely." Draco said nothing. His heart was still racing, the weight of what had happened pressing down on him. Dumbledore wouldn't stop him. Not now. Not unless Draco gave him a reason to. So he did the only thing he could. He nodded, his expression carefully blank, and turned to walk away. But as he moved through the dark corridors of Hogwarts, one thought pulsed through his mind. He was no longer just Draco Malfoy. He was the heir of Salazar Slytherin. And the future of this castle, of this legacy, now rested in his hands.